before we get started. Thank you so much for being a part of the first, hopefully, annual Global Sports Business Forum here at UCLA, right? This has been a very challenging undertaking, and we've got a lot of people that you'll see throughout the day. In fact, you know, you've got our production crew over here, Lamont Pete. You've got our student volunteers who should be like studying to finish their MBA studies, but are out here helping to pull this together for us. Amazing folks giving their time, like Ben Valenta, who we're going to talk to in a second, to make this possible. And so just thanks for being here, and thanks for being here early so that you can get the super secret knowledge that nobody else is going to get, right? All right, so my name is Jay Tucker. I'm the executive director for the Center for Media, Entertainment, and Sports at UCLA's Business School. We do a bunch of things, but at a high level, we're the connective tissue between the school and the media, sports, and entertainment sector. So anything that's focused on the business of sports and entertainment, whether we're talking about tech innovation, fandom, monetization, in-venue experiences, brand partnerships, marketing, analytics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that's our jam, right? You'd have to go to a different conference if you were more interested in how to make people jump higher, right? Okay, so if you're cool with the whole business situation, you're in the right place. And if you're interested in analytics, you're in a great place, because we're lucky enough to have Ben Valenta here, who handles analytics for Fox Sports and who has happened to write a book on fandom. So first, before we get started, welcome, Ben, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Can you talk a little bit about your role?
Sure. So my title is SVP of Strategy and Analytics for Fox Sports, and it's a little bit nebulous, the job description. It's kind of vague and intangible, and it's really actually quite hard to explain, because we do a lot of things that you don't really see, that are about influencing decision-making, about providing insight across a variety of consumer touchpoints. So what we're about is really identifying fan insights that we can then apply to production, marketing, communications, sales, so on and so forth, right? And they're sort of intangible in some respects. It's about how we think about the fan, the consumer. And that can be very qualitative and kind of touchy-feely, and about how fans think about college football. Or it can be very, very, very in the data weeds, right? About what are viewership trends at a zip code level that will help us shape regional NFL maps and influence the broadcast. So we really run the gamut between those two things, and so it requires a lot of different skills, but it's really ultimately about applying insight.
I love it. Now, can you talk a little bit about how this shift in consumption behavior, right? So this shift to so many things, so many experiences being digital, has changed or impacted your role?
Yeah, it's actually, so on the one hand, I think we should recognize that this shift to, I work for a broadcaster, right? So we're in a Nielsen world, which is probably the least precise measurement tool out there. So the shift to digital in some respects should theoretically make my job easier, because it allows us to get closer and closer to the person's behavior at a person-by-person level. But in some regards, it's actually made it more complicated. Digital, mobile, the disaggregation of the fan experience across these different platforms is great for the fans, no question. But it also means that we don't have a through line in terms of analytics that allows us to put all that together in a holistic way. And so what we end up doing is trying to piece together apples and oranges and make sense of the whole picture, and it's actually quite complicated. And it also just down to the specifics. Fans can consume our content across these different platforms on demand, and we don't always even have access to the measurement tools. And so
Wait, stop there. Why don't you have access to the measurement tools?
Well, if you think about podcasts, for instance, right? We get some data from the podcast platforms, Apple and Spotify primarily, but we don't get all the data. And we're not always able to see competitive data, right? And so that makes, piecing together a picture of the podcast landscape and our competitive set quite difficult, right? And it's hard to sort of marry podcast consumption. Take Skip and Shannon Undisputed, right? Our kind of flagship daily studio show. That's consumed on YouTube, on linear TV, it's a podcast, right? So you can listen to the show cut down as an audio version. Skip and Shannon also have their own podcasts. All that stuff, if you like aggregate it up, is a lot of consumption of Skip and Shannon, but it's hard to put together the Nielsen metric with the podcast metric with the YouTube metric. Like those things just don't fit together. And so we have to take a much more holistic view of what all this says about the viewer and consumption and the trend and the way it's going for those folks.
All right. So I want to now go to the other end of that process, which is I'm assuming that you're trying to get that holistic view to help business leaders make decisions. So what kinds of things can you do with those insights that will actually change somebody's mind or influence people to make choices they might not otherwise have made?
Well, I think storytelling is key. I think it really comes back down to insight. Like I think maybe like there's like a point underneath the first question that's about data versus insight. Like we can be awash in data, and we are awash in data. If we don't have insight, the data is not very useful, right? And so it's really insight that we're after. And so if we want to try and influence thinking, one, it's about arriving at insights. Two, it's about data that will then help explain and dramatize those insights. And then it's also just down to storytelling. Like, are you good at telling the story, at making it impactful in the organization, such that all these different people will buy into what you're selling?
All right. So for these folks, let's make it real. Let's go down to like the 5-foot level. Can you give us an example of a thing that you've learned about fans that is interesting and has changed the way we think about their experience?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to this idea that fandom is entirely, or almost entirely, a social enterprise, right? It's about connecting with those people around you. That is fundamentally why you engage as a fan. Now, it's helpful that the product on the court, like on the field between the lines, is entertaining, dramatic. There are star players, compelling storylines, all of those things. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't prioritize those things over our ability to connect through the game, right? And so I think that is a fundamental shift in thinking from maybe what we call like an entertainment paradigm, where it's like this is all about the entertainment. We sell an entertainment product, to a connective paradigm, right? Like it's actually about what's happening on the stands. That's really where the action lies, right? And that's what we should be dramatizing as marketers, as content producers. It's that idea that our content is bringing people together, and that's why they engage.
So now you're kind of speaking to this idea that sports is about community and culture.
Absolutely.
So what do we do with that information? How does that change the way we run our businesses?
Well, I think it changes the framework through which we see the fan and the fan experience, right? And so if you recognize that ultimately what people are buying is belonging, and that's the purchase decision, like that's the trigger, then it changes every aspect, like on down the line, how we're approaching meeting the consumers where they're at. And recognizing that, certain triggers that we thought were important, the star quarterback, for instance, that thing is less important than me connecting with my son or me connecting with my father. And if we recognize that belonging is the ultimate trigger, that's the thing, that's the highest order need that we're serving, then it just should change our orientation to the category.
Okay, just out of curiosity, anybody here from New York? Couple, so y'all can relate, right? Mets, Knicks, Jets, y'all know what's up, right? This idea that it's definitely not about winning, right? So let's unpack this a little bit more. So what about, again, we were just talking about New Yorkers. I am from Queens, just like Peter Parker. I am a Mets fan, right? I've lost all my hair rooting for the Mets. So how do you square the normal, first of all, the normal intensity of fandom, where it seems like folks are separating themselves from everybody else to kind of have these sports experiences, and the emotional roller coaster with this idea that folks are actually like coming together and making like that sports they're getting something that's just making them happy.
Well, it's all connection. Like celebrate, commiserate, it's connection, right? Win, lose, it's connection. That's fundamentally what it's about. And I think that the evidence of your hometown teams, Like that's actually where this originated. I used to do work for the Knicks and the Rangers.
I'm so sorry.
Exactly. And we would spend a lot of time with Knicks season ticket holders, right? And there's one guy that comes to mind. His name's Greg Anthony. If you look it up, he's like super fan number one. He's like on the wall of the Garden. Like he's there. He's on Fox 5 all the time talking Knicks, right? And we spent a lot of time with him. He's a grocery store manager in Yonkers. He has 4 kids. He doesn't have a lot of time. He doesn't have a ton of disposable income. And yet he travels, hour and a half each way to go to 35 plus games a year, right? And when you approach that purchase decision from the sort of normal paradigm, the entertainment paradigm, you say, Greg, why do you do this? Like, you've been following what you regard as laughable bad basketball for 20 plus years, right? You had a good 8-year run when you started with Pat Riley, and now it's just been a desert. Why are you still here? Why? You don't have a ton of disposable income. You don't have a ton of time. You're a busy guy. How can you do this? And he trots out, because he doesn't actually understand his behavior, he trots out the line, you got to support the team. It's about loyalty. It's about all those sort of tropes that we as fans kind of recognize viscerally. But then you spend time with him. You go to the Garden with him. You walk into the Garden with him. He knows everybody, right? His entire social network is built around the Knicks, right? He gets all sorts of a buzz when he talks to the usher. He knows them by name. Sits next to the people in his section, knows all of them around him, talks about their kids, right? Gets into how work's going. It's just like a deep well of connection when you walk into the Garden. We went to a barbershop with him, right? He walks in the barbershop. All of a sudden, the conversation shifts to the Knicks, right? He's the star of the show. 20 guys, all rapping about the Knicks and having a great time, right? Then you get to his sort of like typical game day experience. He has 4 sons. He's mostly going to those games, those 35 plus games, with one of his sons, right? And it clicks for me all of a sudden. You realize that the 90-minute commute to the game is a feature, not a bug, right? It's not a barrier anymore. It's why he's doing it. He gets 90 minutes in the car with one of his sons, right? Like I have kids. I know that I don't get that kind of time, right? That's the reason that he's buying these tickets. That's the reason that he's going, right? It's about this connection. And so it reframes that irrational purchase decision of like, why are you devoting so much time and money to this thing that's not good, to, this is how you connect with your family. This is how you connect with your friends. You have a richer, fuller life as a result of this activity. And now we can really get to the crux of why you're putting all this money and time into it.
See, now you telling that anecdote, one tells me that dude is the same age as I am, but also tells me that when we talk, you said this earlier too about we're washing data, but what we need is insights. There's a tendency, I think, in the business right now, and this is an important point because this is not just for the sports business. In business generally, the fact that we can measure digital activity has kind of pushed everybody to use that as sometimes the primary or the exclusive source of insights, right? Where there's been this kind of debate about, some people are tastemakers. They have their gut tells them this is the trend or whatever, and then you have other people coming along. But we have data, and there's this more enlightened kind of, but you can have a bionic gut, meaning you can go out and get digital insights and then also combine that with tastemakers and other people who can help shape it. But what you're saying is actually implying kind of a different process, which is to go back to some of the other research methods, ethnographic studies, following people home, focus groups, qualitative insights that then you mix with sentiment analysis on social or consumption data on digital, et cetera, to actually get a true picture of the fan. Not that any picture's the true picture.
Yeah, well, and it can work both ways. Like it doesn't have to be qualitative that gets you to the insight. It can be quantitative that gets you to the insight. It can be all of these different tools kind of coming together. The trick is the insight, like get to the insight. And then coming back to one of your first questions, like how do you influence the building, as it were? Then you have to actually have stuff to back it up. So this is where I have this insight, right? This goes back to like before I'm even at Fox, this insight about Greg and the Knicks and what fandom's all about. I then spend time with college football fans, NFL fans, MLB fans, et cetera, and I just keep seeing the same theme come up. But I'm not getting any buy-in in the building because it's me just saying, hey, I met this guy Greg, and everybody's like, well, that's one guy. It doesn't jive with my experience necessarily as a fan. I'm kind of closed-minded to a new approach. So how do you get people to shift their thinking? That's where you need some of the data. So then it goes into this process of, okay, how can we prove this out at scale, right? And part of that process is being willing to be wrong, right? You're not just like, you can't just prove your assumptions correct, right? You can't have that kind of bias. But you need to go and approach it with an open mind, but with the intent of getting that qualitative data, getting that data at scale that allows you to then tell the story. So that's where we get to, just to finish the Greg story, that's where we get to this idea of fans have more friends, right? Which is the title of the book, which is a plug.
We haven't talked about the title of the book. But
yeah, so that's the title of the book. So we had this idea of what Greg is sort of telling us, that's the kind of the animating life force of fandom. Well, if that's true, then fans would have more friends. Greg's story is not a testable hypothesis. If fans have more active, vibrant social networks, that's a testable hypothesis. So now we're into something that can push our thinking even further. And so it's true, to sort of spoiler, fans do have more friends, right? And it's not like by a little bit. It's almost double, in fact. If you're a really engaged sports fan, you're going to have 35.6 friends on average across a data set of like 63,000. If you're not a fan, it's about 19.1, right? You're talking about doubling your social infrastructure by being a fan. Not only do you have more friends, you engage with those people more frequently, which is really important actually, and you value those relationships more. Same is true for family relationships. So the bigger fan you are, the more likely you are to have a positive relationship with your mother. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So that's all well and good. Like I kind of proved Greg's story out. I'm able to dramatize that in the building. Now I'm getting buy-in in the industry. Like that's helpful, right? I can tell a nice story. It helps that I have a nice little headline, fans have more friends too. Like that helps people kind of glom onto the idea. But as far as fandom's concerned and how we think about fandom, all that connection, all those additional friends, turns out to be really, really good for people. So then we start testing a bunch of wellness markers. And it turns out that fans have more friends. As a result of that, they're happier. They're more satisfied with their life. They're more grateful. They're more optimistic about the future. They're more confident. They're more trusting of institutions. They're more trusting of other people. They are more likely to exercise, eat right, read. A bunch of stuff that we would all regard as positive, objectively, fans actually do more of that stuff. They lead these fuller, richer lives. And so that reframes the entire enterprise of fandom, not as like a business thing, but actually a social good. Like if loneliness is a pervasive problem, which it is, the answer to loneliness is more belonging. Guess what gives us more belonging at a population level? Fandom. Like, so we should all want more fandom out there. So now we're having a different conversation, at Fox at least, as in terms of like what our role in society is. It's really about promoting this idea of connection and belonging.
Okay, I'm just going to let that marinate for a second. That's amazing. So, are there any conversations about trying to leverage the fandom for social impact purposes, to energize fans to do charity or to, fight cancer or any of that stuff?
Absolutely, and it actually kind of works both ways. So fans are more likely to give to charity. So the bigger fan you are, the more likely you are to give to charity on a regular basis, right? So it starts even just with this is the lowest hanging fruit. If you're trying to move the needle for a charitable organization, you should be focused first and foremost on engaged, high-value fans. Like that's where you should start. But it also stands to reason that if you can generate more of those types of fans, you can then generate more charitable giving. And so you want to try to get to the top of the funnel then of like, how do we generate more fandom? Like what's the lever we can pull that will get people to engage more? How do we move people who are casual fans, sort of engaged, what I would call like low-value fans? How do we get them to move towards high-value fans, to embrace that behavior?
And how do we do that?
Well, it starts with social connection, right? Like the only way that you're going to engage as a fan, and the only way that you're going to deepen your engagement over time, is if you have relationships that are predicated and sustained by the sport itself, by the fandom, right? So the best way to think about it is like fandom works on a flywheel, right? There's like two variables. So flywheel, just X influences Y, Y then in turn influences X, right? It creates positive feedback loop that generates energy. So fandom works like that. I engage as a fan, I reap all of these social connections as a result, all these interactions, it improves my life, that incentivizes me to engage further in fandom, and so on and so forth, the flywheel spins. Now, if you want to influence either end of the flywheel, you should just think about the other end of the flywheel, right? In other words, if I want more social connection, I should want more fandom. If I want more fandom, I want more social connection. right? And so the only way that we think about this, we can put it in a real practical example. We just started the USFL, right? Mm-hmm. I know, based on this understanding of fandom, that the only way that we're going to get people to engage in a new league is if their social relationships are predicated and sustained by the league, right? People got to be talking about the stuff. They got to be sharing it. You got to create moments in the stands where families can connect, right? Where friends can connect, where college buddies can come back and have a reunion. Those are the sorts of things that generate the fandom and the long-term engagement. It's not to do with the star players, right? It's not to do with the level of scoring in a game, right? Those things are all well and good. We should seek to have star players and high-scoring and entertaining games. But ultimately, what's going to sustain fandom is that connection in the stands.
Love it. All right. So we have, by my estimates, about 9 minutes left. You've already blown me away. I don't know if I would say I'm happier because I'm a Knicks fan, but I'm going to just go with it right now.
Yes, please.
This is UCLA, not a corporate conference. Do you all have questions? Ooh, in the back. What's the book?
The book is Fans Have More Friends, and it's an exploration of all these themes we've been talking about. And it's available November 15th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question.
I'm curious about kind of the younger generation. What have you seen from, analyzing that data? Because we keep hearing in the sports world, like, younger generation doesn't want to go to baseball games. They don't want to sit around and watch a 1, 2, 3 hour game. So, like, what have you found? Is that accurate? Is that not really the whole picture?
It's not really the whole picture. Sorry.
I'm just repeating because I know you're not on the mic. Are the tales we've heard about the young generation accurate?
They're not complete, right? So I wouldn't say that. It's false to say that the consumer behavior of the younger cohort is somehow the same as the older cohort. Like there are fundamental changes in how they consume content, right? So that's true. I think the issue, this kind of gets back to this idea that the way to sustain fandom is to get people to engage socially about the sport, right? So that's the thing that we should be thinking about as sort of like rights holders, as leagues, as teams. So while I would sort of say like we see like Nielsen ratings, which are a very imperfect measurement tool, show that teens and 18 to 34-year-olds are watching less. That's the only data point that I have that indicates that there's some sort of softening in fandom, right? And I would also marry that to this idea that we do know that fandom kind of it runs in a kind of a pattern of ups and downs throughout life, right? Typically, you sort of peak in your like early 20s, and then you kind of soften, and then you peak. Like peak fandom is 35 to 45, right? And so those people, I'm very confident, will age into fandom, and fandom that looks a little bit more like what we're accustomed to. But then we also have to be attuned to how media habits are changing. Like, this doesn't mean that we can just kind of ignore TikTok, right? Like, we need to be where the fans are. But we just need to make sure that we're thinking about that in the right priority order and understanding what's really driving the behavior.
In the front. Are there any negative effects to fandom?
Not that I can think of, right? Like, I get this question a lot about, like, well, what about the divisive side of fandom, right? Or people will bring up rivalries all the time, like that's something. The fact is, rivalries make it more fun, right? Like, if you're a Yankees fan, like chatting up with a Boston Red Sox fan, I know you're not. That's a more compelling conversation. It's just another way of connecting with people, right? We use these words like hate. I hate the Red Sox. It's like, well, no, you don't. Like, that's not really like how you actually think about it. You're not using. We all recognize you're not using that word to mean, in that context the same way that it would be applied in another context, right? And then I guess like there's another thing that comes up a lot, which is like, what about like the unruly fans, right? And like the mobs after Tennessee just upsets Alabama and there's somebody lights a couch on fire in Knoxville. Like that stuff happens, right? Like I just watched something on Twitter. It was some like 55-year-old drunk Cleveland Guardians fan taking a swing at a 55-year-old drunk Yankees fan in the bleachers. And it's like, I don't think sports are causing that. Like those guys got some issues. Like, but I don't think it's sports. Like if it wasn't in the stadium, those guys probably pick a fight with somebody at a bar or where I don't know that I see any sort of deleterious effects of fandom. And I think some of those things that are kind of the stereotype version of fandom kind of take our eye off the ball of like how meaningful and profound this actually is.
You said a lot. See all the hands went up here in the corner.
So I'm a trauma-informed youth development social-emotional learning practitioner, and we've been positing the power of connection and sense of belonging for quite a while. And so much so that we've connected it to the sports teams in a different way. What are you doing now about taking that more, taking your research, your findings, and connecting that to the social impact on a greater scale in all of these different areas?
I mean, I'd love to talk with you more about how to do it. Like, we're just kind of scratching the surface of what the impacts of this thinking can be. So at the moment, I'm a little ashamed to say I'm not doing that much with it, but I want to do more with it. And I think that that's kind of what's spurred the book, to be honest, is I went from writing this, it actually started as a business book. It was like, this is a professional obligation. And as soon as I started to understand some of the impact we see at a community level, it became an advocacy mission. Like now I'm the evangelist for fandom, right? Like that's my job. And so I want to figure out ways to spread the good word.
Okay. In the back.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit on your comment about no negative effects. All the examples you listed were in the U.S. Look at football, Argentina, Europe, Middle East. Completely different story. When they look at U.S. sports, when they make that statement or anything.
Okay, U.S. versus globally. So we were just talking about how the negative effects of fandom aren't necessarily unique to fandom here in the U.S. Is that also true globally when we think about what happens in South America or Europe when it comes to football fandom?
So there's sort of two ways I would go with this. One is the book and my research focus is exclusively on domestic sports. And my hunch, it's just a hypothesis at this point, is that fandom in the U.S. is unique to fandom elsewhere. We just have more of it, and so the impact, I think, is greater. So if you compare a U.S. sports fan to like a U.K. sports fan, right? Like soccer is really big in the U.K., and then there's also other sports like rugby and cricket, but they don't demand the same sort of cultural place that the NFL, NBA, MLB, college football does here. And we have this kind of like reliable, recurring rhythm of being a fan all year long. So domestic fandom is, I think, different than global fandom. That said, like there's a lot of these threads that I think apply elsewhere. And so there are examples. But I would also even kind of push back on some of these examples that we're raising. That's a pretty broad brush. Are there riots in the streets of Sao Paulo or Buenos Aires? Yeah. I think that there are probably other sort of social structural issues at work that are driving this forward. You know, if we like go way back and we look at like sectarian violence in Glasgow, right, between Rangers and Celtics fans, like the teams kind of become an embodiment of that thing, but there's an underlying issue and an underlying current that's actually driving the division. That's not really sports. It kind of rises to the surface with sports, but I'm not sure sports are to blame for that.
All right, I got to stop it there because we're coming up on time. I want to just point out that there will be conversations like this in these breakout rooms throughout the day, right? In fact, I think next door, a little later this morning, you'll have Mitch Richmond, former NBA Hall of Famer, we talk about fandom, will be here, right? So not everything that's going on today is going to be upstairs. So I encourage you to use, that's why we told you to dress comfortably, use your feet, move around, and so on. Ben, you've been an amazing start to the day. Thank you so much. Can folks hit you up if they have questions?
Of course, yep, absolutely.
And you know, specific to the book, you said it drops November 15th.
Yep.
Is there any other, an article, a white paper, or some other thing that people can find about Fans Have More Friends between now and then?
Oh, there'll be plenty of media. If you're following Fans Have More Friends, then you'll see the flow of op-eds and such coming your way. Podcasts, radio shows, local TV in Sheboygan.
Nice. Nice. Why not in Sheboygan?
Yeah, it's
all right.
great.
So to be continued, we will see you all upstairs in the main space. Thank you, Ben. Enjoy your day.